With both my video on the MPF program and the video on the obsolescence of tanks, many people have called the usefulness of light tanks into question. Most generally agree that main battle tanks will always be useful, but with all the reports coming out of Ukraine, many have doubts about the usefulness of light tanks in general. To be upfront, light vehicles are my main area of interest when it comes to AFVs, so I might be a bit biased. But it also means that I've spent a lot of time researching their benefits and applications, so I thought I would try to explain why, in my eyes, light tanks are still useful as a concept. But before we get into it, I want to talk about my sponsor. I'm partnered with Apex Gaming. They make pre-built PCs. If you're looking to upgrade, you should check them out. Link is in the description and comments. You can use my username as a discount code on checkout. Now back to the video. It seems like whenever a large conflict kicks off, a lot of media showing destroyed tanks gets shared around. The knee-jerk reaction is that tanks as a whole are obsolete, or that they are inadequate as they currently exist. The second statement is more reasonable than the first, but I think it also ignores one important detail. Losses do not always indicate that the vehicle is inadequate. A lot of the time they are simply unavoidable. It's also important to remember that these victories are cultural as well. Oftentimes, tanks are seen as the distillation of a nation's military might, so if you destroy one, it is a major propaganda tool. Because of that, whenever you're browsing Twitter or whatever, you are more likely to see a lot of them. I think it's worth mentioning that in the case of Ukraine, I do think that the sheer volume of Russian vehicles being destroyed does show that their vehicles and tactics are outdated, but that isn't a universal truth for every nation. Anyway, most people assume that in order to counter modern threats, tanks should receive more armor, and that light vehicles would be even worse off. I don't really think this is the case at all. If you look at the majority of anti-tank weapons being used, and how these weapons are being employed, how much armor the vehicle has doesn't have much of an impact. For munitions like the NLR Javelin, they can effectively negate a vehicle's armor, thanks to their top attack modes. For older weapons like RPGs, they're employed in such a way that armor isn't usually relevant. In the majority of cases I've seen, these older AT rounds are fired at the vehicle's rear, where protection is basically non-existent. That isn't to say that armor is totally useless. It does force the enemy to reconsider how they're going to go about attacking, and can hinder their plans in some scenarios, but armor is not an absolute solution. It's all about probability. This is the part of the video where I bring up the survivability onion. I know I bring it up a lot, but it's a great teaching aid. As for surviving on the battlefield, not being penetrated is only one step in the process. Not being seen and not being shot are arguably just as important, if not more so. In these two respects, Russian tanks have been failing severely. There is an acute lack of awareness, and these tanks are often heavily exposed, mostly being relegated to roads. My point is, in most engagements I don't think it'd matter if the vehicle is a light or MBT. The best way to counter modern AT threats is with an active protection system, but these systems are usually pretty light, so they can often be mounted on light vehicles. For example, both MPF bids are offered with an active protection system as an optional upgrade. These vehicles can also mount applique armor, whether ERA or NERA. They won't stop something like a Javelin, but they're pretty effective at stopping older man portable AT. As for other weapons like HMGs and autocannons, many light tanks are protected against those as well. With all of this in mind, if you compare an MBT to a fully kitted light tank, it would not be considerably more protected. Obviously, tank-on-tank engagements change that a bit, but those are pretty rare. But enough about protection. What benefits do light tanks offer? Their lightweight obviously makes them much easier to transport through a number of means. There's often a heavy focus on their air transportability, and that is a pretty big boon. Being able to deploy to areas the enemy might not expect, especially with armor, will always be extremely useful, and can pave the way for heavier units. This is a bit of a gamble though, as if an airdrop operation is botched, it can incur horrible losses. There's also the naval landing aspect. A few light vehicles that exist nowadays are also amphibious, and can be used to secure beachheads. It is worth noting that MBTs can also be used for this, but require large landing craft to do so. It's also worth mentioning that, generally speaking, for any given method of transportation, you can transport more light tanks than you can MBTs. Transportation infrastructure is also important. Due to their immense weight, MBTs usually require their own specialized support assets, while most light tanks can use more common assets. This makes them easier to disseminate and support. And of course, light tanks can go many places where MBTs simply can't. Western MBTs especially are quite heavy, which limits the routes and infrastructure they can use. Light tanks don't have the same issue. For vehicles like the Type 16 and ZTQ-15, they were specifically designed with this in mind. Having the best and most powerful tank is all well and good, but if you can't actually get the thing to the fight, it might as well be scrap. So yes, MBTs do have an edge in protection, but I believe the difference isn't that large, and that the benefits of transportability, maintainability, and cost outweigh the downsides. That isn't to say lights are superior. Both classes excel in different areas. Depending on the situation, one will be more useful than the other. The point is that while people think that having a light tank is oxymoronic, they do have their uses. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.